All right, guys, welcome to the IP meeting. A lot of the stuff that we heard, of course, for the aircrew meeting applies here. I'll just give a quick, obviously we're running a little bit late, a quick recap, if you will. Not necessarily a recap, but a little bit more information. And then we'll just have Grunt brief today. We'll save Mean for next time, so to speak, all right? So like I said with the aircrew meeting, right, reading this book, it kind of made me think about some stuff that we already knew but maybe didn't understand necessarily, okay? We'll real quick go over some stuff. CT beans, check the binder at the front, okay? Upgrade plan, there it is. It'll probably change. Upgrades, you know about that. Waivers have not changed. It's back in tab 7. Stanaval, I think BAM did a bunch of shit, but if your name's up there, knock out your testing and your check rides. F-track update, we're still working on the standards creator. Anything else on that? Okay, another week or two. We had a quick class update from Haas. Anything to note?
I mostly want to get in inputs. Is there anything that I can fix or help
with this?
Anything to fix the Wizzos?
If you have any inputs, but I don't have anything particular.
Copy. Have any of your students been highlighted for anything?
No, standard bust, one cap, back off cap, just gives two busts.
Copy. Standard busts, one.
So is he going to go on cap with them?
Based off today, yeah.
Okay, so Wilkerson will go on cap Wizzo.
Haas, how about Pete, the sad panda? Because he hooked today as well.
He was the one that was on cap.
Okay.
Cap, because then I heard, yeah.
Not strong today.
Okay.
Here, man.
So Pete Galindez, a.k.a. Tony Shalhoub, a.k.a. Monk, Adrian Monk, he is going to go back on cap. All right. Anything else there, Hans, about your students? Okay. So some standard busts, Wilkerson and Galindez will go back on cap. All right. Wilkerson will go on cap. All right. And then there's the timeline, right?
Yeah, highlights of the last sortie, the graduation days on the right. So you can see the number of days for most of them. 3 to 4. Some of them are at Saudis officially at contact. Roy, side.
Okay, so Saudis will graduate probably late, again, standard. Copy. Okay?
Is their FTU start date pretty close to after the 6th?
No, but they have SEER like a week on 18th or something.
Okay.
So a week after.
A couple of them, Sears starting. Track. Okay, so November 6th graduation date. Next training is SEER on the 18th, so we have a little bit of time. Anything else to note for the timeline? Copy. Anything for CBR there, Grunt?
So there's only one student whose name I have learned so far, and that's because he's hooked a sim. So SCP-1, he hooked for pretty much everything. He's done SCP-1X, and that went much better. So far I've flown his F1 and his F2. Mission preparation is lacking, so he's just highlighted. And that's about the only person that I'm aware of right now that has done anything substandard. So Palmer is his name, Nate Palmer. Probably. He is Alabama Guard F-16. So.
Ah, Tuskegee Airmen. All right. All right, CT plan. I'm keeping it simple. You guys asked for it, so here we go. So Mondays are the first day of the week. We're going to have the first 4 lines going to be CT. So that's going to start this next Monday. So on Monday, the first 4 lines will be CT. The idea is you can practice what you learn here, and I'll get into that in a second. Or if you have actual other CT beans that you have to knock out, go ahead and knock those out. Like Piro will tell you, if you're scheduled for something on the board, it's because he's keeping track of stuff, and you need to log that, right? Fly it, / log it. All right, and then 2 lines per day for the rest of the week. They're just floating. Use them again to practice this stuff, or log whatever you need to log to get done by the end of the calendar year. All right, so that's the plan. And those numbers get us like, what was it, Piro, like 700-ish sorties per year? Almost 600, and then we'll have some more for like Vegas and whatever else. That's pretty much our CT plan for the year. That's the minimum. We can fly more, and we will probably, but that's our minimum plan. So we'll schedule you for some stuff, but the focus, right, you want focus CT. That was one of the takeaways from Eglin. So we'll brief stuff here, and then you can practice it in your CT stuff, or we'll schedule you for the things that you need. That's basically the takeaway, right? Okay. So now real quick on this, right? We've already talked about a little bit about your brain, okay? Like I said, I think on the crew, right, the definition there that Richard Restick, neuropsychologist, gives, right, of cognition is ability of your brain, our brain, to attend, identify, and act. And like I said, to me that sounds a lot like, right, our briefing and debriefing principles, right? Attend, right, is to perceive, right? You're paying attention to stuff, you're figuring things out, you're perceiving information. Identify / decide, or what to do with that information, and then you act or execute, okay? So I think it wraps in exactly with what we are trying to do as instructors. So my whole goal now, I'm a nerd, so I'm kind of excited about this, is really to focus in really improving our instruction with a focus of helping Stanley, helping the students, the wingmans, learn to chair fly just like I told them, okay? So that's going to be kind of the focus here for a while, and I'll get into that in a second. All right, so there's your brain. All right, the first chapter in this book, right, Mozart's Brain and the Fighter Pilot, right, kind of talks about, hey, the best thing to do is kind of know how it works. So roughly, real quick, right, we got 100 billion nerve cells, right, neurons, even more non-neuronal cells, glia, all right? The neurons communicate information, all right? The other stuff kind of stores it. The outer wrinkled mantle, you kind of heard in that TED talk, was the gray matter, okay? That's the cerebral cortex. That's where the higher level thought processing goes on. We'll get to that in a second. That's got 30 billion of those neurons in it, okay? And those are linked with 1,000,000,000 billion synapses, all right? That's a lot, all right? According to a Nobel Prize guy in here, it would take 32 million years counting 1 synapse per second to count them all. That's a lot. All the neuronal connections are 10 followed by 1,000,000 zeros. To put that into perspective, all the known matter of the universe, particles, 10 followed by 79 zeros. That is a lot of power in the brain, right? The cerebral cortex, right? That's the gray matter. That, you can think of it as that writes your software program, okay? And then it puts it down in the basal ganglia, right? It takes it over to kind of run that program, if you want to put it in a kind of computer programming perspective, if you will. All right, and if you care, basal ganglia right there's right in the middle. That cerebral cortex is all that wrinkled stuff there on the top, okay? The cerebellum is down there towards the back bottom there. That is responsible for movement, balance, and coordination, okay? So why is this all important? So a couple quotes, right? Linkages, once formed, are strengthened by repetition, right? Chair flying, okay? Presuming you are doing it correctly, right? And that's what we're here to teach those wingmen to do, all right? Also, neuroscientists have known for years that any skilled activity enhances the cerebellum. In addition, we now know that imagining or mentally concentrating on the activities can accomplish a similar result. Sit in your room, chair fly, moving the hands would be great, but to think about how they're actually controlling the jet, aka chair flying, right? We have to teach these guys how to chair fly, all right? What else? Extensive two-way connections between the cerebellum and the frontal cortex make this possible, right? Those connections. And then intelligence enhancement, therefore, involves creating as many neuronal linkages as possible. Just kind of like I talked about at the end there with the wingman, okay? So what happens as we get older? First of all, early in the first few years, right, brain development is by attrition. So you're actually, the neurons you're not using, you lose them, okay? So that you're decreasing, but the richness and complexity of those neurons increases, all right? As we mature, neurons band together into networks that increase in number. So we're creating those networks, all right? The greater number of circuits a neuron participates in, the better, right? And additional networks can be easily formed as spin-offs from existing networks. An example was, right, you learn a language, that first one's kind of difficult, but subsequent languages are easier to learn. So what does this mean for us? We've already got the network of briefing, right, down. But listening to other IPs' briefs, right, can help create more networks, right? There's little intricacies in there that maybe we haven't thought about. So now we're going to expand our brains. We're going to create more neural networks in our own brains so we can help stand out because there's a lot of good techniques out there. So that's basically what this means, all right? There's just some other quotes in here. There's a couple good ones. Just like we said, mentally concentrating on the activities can accomplish a similar result. Oh, and here we go. Kind of talks about chair flying. So PET scans, positron emission tomography, right, is actually what that stands for, right? The PET scans provide evidence of the benefits of mental rehearsal, all right? So basically your brain is lighting up more as you chair fly. So the mental rehearsal of an action activates the prefrontal areas responsible for the formation, right, of the appropriate motor programs. What does it mean? It means mentally chair flying, again, helps write that software that you use later on. Okay, just thinking about it. Obviously, it can't substitute for the real thing, but it complements. And then finally, before I hand it over here, doesn't really matter, right? There's those connections. Yay, slide. Graphics, pictures. It says, for a little bit of a practical advice here, first, think about what you want to achieve. Second, come up with specific achievable steps to facilitate your goal. And then finally, regularly review the steps leading to that desired goal, right? As far as chair flying, right, think about what you want to achieve, right, how you're going to do this, right? And then second, come up with a specific achievable steps, right? So the actual, what am I doing with my left hand, right hand? What information am I looking at with my eyes and when? Why am I looking at it? What does it mean to me? And what is that going to cause me to do, okay? And then review the steps, right? Am I doing it correctly? And that's where we come in as IPs, right? The JET gives them feedback, the SIMs give them feedback, and of course we as IPs give them feedback. So I was very serious there when I told the students, right, talk to us, like, am I chair flying correctly? Okay, I don't know how much chair flying they do. It doesn't seem like all that much to me. I think they should be chair flying a lot more. Okay, and we need to help them chair fly. So when we bitch about them texting us or calling us, you know, the night before, do you ask them, hey, how have you been chair flying this? Are you chair flying this? How many times have you chair flown this? Have you thought about this? Maybe think about those little things right there, how you can get their brains working a little bit better to think about this stuff, okay? So with that, there you go. That's some higher level stuff. All right, so the application is from, you know, the next couple IP meetings, we're going to have the experienced dips give us practice briefs. And just like I mentioned, right, just pay attention. Some of the stuff you've heard before, but hopefully it'll spark some more neurons, right, in your cerebral cortexes, right, so you can update your briefs and figure out some good stuff. And then specifically, hey, how am I going to teach Stan to chair fly, all right? There we go, some higher level shit. Any questions right now? Probably not. We're fading because it's Friday and it's 4:40. So with that, right, Grunt is going to give us a practice 3K. I hear him talk about 3K a lot, and I'm really impressed with what he says. So the other thing, too, is we tried at Shepherd to, like, have, whatever it was, first Mondays of a month, like the IPs would sit in other IPs' briefs. And that didn't happen. I can't force you guys to do that. Like the KIP Academy, I can only offer you the opportunity to work hard. So go ahead, if you have time, if you're the DS, stay in there and listen to some briefs, some instructional briefs. That will help as well, of course, because you're just rehearsing, you're rehearsing, okay? I want to throw that in there as well. And now, Grunt, you've got it.
Okay. Thank you, Thug, for this opportunity. There's a couple new guys, right? The dips here. So I'm Grunt. I'm one of the flight commanders here, an Eagle guy by trade. In addition to modding out my truck and growing sideburns, I also like to occasionally brief 3K offensives. All right, that's what I'm going to brief to you guys out there today. Now I'll caveat it with this is how I brief Stan. Right. So this is not necessarily what I would want to hear in a UI brief. Right, and everybody is going to be a little bit different in how they, you know, reorient their lift vector, how quickly they select max AB, all of that kind of stuff, right? So what am I trying to give you guys, so to speak, today, right, is not what I am briefing, but it's how I'm briefing, right? So left hand, right hand, eyeballs, right? It's kind of the way that I like to think about it, right? And also incorporate your feet. I'll talk about how I talk about that in the 3K brief, right? So just a little bit of a story, dude. I flew with and hooked a guy, right, on his HB2F today because he had no concept of how to correctly fly a moderate buffet turn and a single rate beep return, right? So the min radius turn and the rate fight were non-existent today on an HB2. And that's why he hooked, all right? So we spent the entirety of our debrief talking about left hand, right hand, rudder pedals, right? And where is he supposed to be looking with his eyeballs? That, I don't think, should be happening on an HB2, right? OB2, OB3, OB4, maybe sometimes in the DB phase, absolutely, right? And what is a contributing factor to that? potentially the instructions they're getting on HB or OB1 and OB2, right? How do they mechanically fly the Marta Buffett turn? How do they mechanically fly a rate fight, right? So that's what I'm going to try and portray out there today. And with that being said, we've already covered the admin, right? We've already covered the academics. All of that is standard. I'll let you guys go and figure all that kind of shit out yourselves, right? So now what I would do is I would grab the sticks and I would say, Stan, today for the first 3K setup that we're going to end up doing, we'll be level, line abreast, 1.0 on the air-to-air tack end, right? You'll be at 350 knots, and your IP is going to say push it up. You're already there, right? So you should be good to go. So he'll say 1's ready, 2's ready, all right? And now we're going to check into our flight lead, right? So when he says clove, check left, right? Now I would like you to select mill power, right? Put your flight path marker level on the horizon, right? And we are going to pull and drag that flight path marker across the horizon until we go and put the gun cross on your flight lead, right? Or so on the Bandit at this point, right? Airspeed should remain constant at 350 knots, right? I give him that as a target. 350 knots plus or minus 10 is great to say that we've got a valid setup, but I want him to be specific at exactly 350 knots, right? And that's what I find works well with these guys, right? And now once I go ahead and put the flight lead underneath the gun cross, I'm going to reverse the direction of my turn, maybe quickly power modulate to maintain 350 knots, and then I am going to increase the backstick pressure to go and leave him underneath that gun cross, right? My eyeballs are now going from the gun cross to the air-to-air tack end, all right? As well as cross-checking the airspeed to make sure that I am counting down the ranges at the appropriate time with a big emphasis making sure that I call the fights on at 3,000 feet, right? So how are we going to do that? At 1.0, as I reverse my turn, we'll call 6,000, right? So we'll say that on the aux radio. For 5,000, I'm going to wait till I see 0.8 on the air-to-air tack end. 0.7 on the air-to-air tack end, right, is going to be 4,000, right? Then give it a potato. You're going to see 0.6, all right, on the air-to-air tack end. Wait a potato, and now you're going to call clove. Fights on, right? You're going to say that loud on the aux radio, right, with enough emphasis to make sure that everybody understands what it is that we're going to be doing, right? Stan, do you have any questions on how we're going to do that? All right? Hopefully the answer is going to be no at this point, all right? Now, Stan, for your first 3K offensive, right? So objectives up here on the board, right? First thing is to go and maneuver to a control zone, right? Stan, where are we, right? At the fights on, we are at basically your attack hues, right? It should be roughly about 30 degrees of aspect and roughly 3,000 feet, right? So Stan, we've basically met the first objective already through no fault of your own. Next, what do we need to do, right? We need to maneuver to a WES, all right? So now, Stan, what do we need to do is we need to, at this fight's on, right, you have a game plan. Stan, what is your game plan? Pull, lead, and assess, all right? So Stan, what are we assessing? He might give you some answers, right? Some range and aspect cues, something along those lines. But really what are we assessing at that point here is, can I achieve a WES and can I go and kill this bandit, right? So what are we looking for the bandit to do, right? So Stan, what do you expect the bandit to do at the fight's on? He's going to tell you that he should jink, right? So he's going to jink out of plane. So Stan, now I want you to go and make that decision. Is this something that you can go and continue to gun? Or is this something that you would rather repo, get back out of the control zone and try again, maybe with an unaware bandit, right? So the initial actions, right, is going to be to pull, lead, and assess, right? Because we want to be in a position at this point here to make this kill happen, all right? Where's my pens? Does anybody have any pens? Here we go. All right, so at the fight's on, we're going to see the bandit out in front of us, jink. Most likely, significantly out of plane, all right? So what does out of plane mean for me, right? It means that he is going significantly down below the horizon. It's going to make a difficult gunshot for me to saddle up and make all of that happen, all right? So Stan, what do I want you to do? I want you to initially pull lead and assess, all right? Knowing that he's probably going to jink out of plane and we're probably going to immediately repo, right? So how do I execute that, all right? So Stan, you're going to see this at the initial picture, right? He will jink significantly out of plane, moving with a high line of sight rate down below the horizon. And what we're going to do is trying to go and set our lift vector out in front of the bandit, leading with our gun cross, and we're going to power modulate as we're making this happen to go and control the amount of closure that we have, right? So idle power initially as we pull lead and attempt that gunshot. Stan, if you see a level break out there, meaning he stays relatively level or parallel today with the horizon, I want you to go and continue with that gunshot. So Stan, how is that going to be employed today? Now what I'd like you to do is, again, continue to lead with that gun cross, right? You're going to put him underneath that 2,500 foot dot, and you're going to wait until he's within range of your bullets, right? So the max range of the gun, 2,500 feet. How do I estimate that? I bring the air-to-air tack end in, right? So 0.4 on the air-to-air tack end is roughly equal to about 2,500 feet on most jets. Stan, you're going to wait until you see 0.4 on the air-to-air attack hand, at which point you're going to come down on the trigger for a good 2-second trigger squeeze. Power remains in idle, and you're going to be using aileron inputs to go and guide that gun cross in front of the plane of motion of the Bandit so as to keep him inside of that funnel, all right? And now you're going to come down on the trigger for a good 2-second trigger squeeze. At the end of that 2-second trigger squeeze, Stan, you're going to repo. And we'll talk about how we're going to do that here in a second, all right? But Stan, do you think that's really going to happen today, all right? Do you think Ringo is going to go out there and do a level jink? No, it's probably not going to happen, all right? So realistically, what's going to happen is we're going to see the Bandit jink significantly out of plane. Perfect. Stan, this is not something that I want you to continue a gunshot with today. When you see that happen, I want you to immediately repo, all right? So how do we execute this repo? Stan, we're already in idle power, right? I want you to rapidly use ailerons to go and slap your left wing against the horizon and immediately set your lift vector halfway between the Bandit and the horizon. Now, this is not in accordance with the playbook, right? So the playbook talks about bumping up, getting to the Mara Buffett turn. Stan, this needs to happen instantaneously, right? So the faster you can make this happen, the faster you can get your jet back into a WES and employ weapons before we happen to get outside of the control zone. So that's what I want you to make happen, all right? So in idle power, touch your wing against the horizon, quickly roll back and set your lift vector halfway between the Bandit and the horizon. By this time, the Bandit is well below the horizon, all right? And that's how we're going to make that happen. Those are your initial moves, Stan. I want you to think about that before we call the fights on today. Questions on that? All right? So that's my first phase. After that, I'm going to move on to the Mara Buffett turn. Perfect. Stan, you've set your lift vector halfway between the Bandit and the horizon. You are now neutral with the controls. Your power is still in idle power, right? What is our range at this point? If you did things fast enough, we should still be roughly 3,000 feet back from the Bandit, right, with not a significant amount of closure, all right? The aspect that you're going to see is probably a little bit more than 30 degrees, but today that's going to work fine for us for being at our attack use. So Stan, immediately after you set your lift vector halfway between the Bandit and the horizon, I want you to select with your left hand max AB, right? Push that throttle forward, and now with your right hand, I want you to pull back to the moderate Buffett turn. Stan, how do we get to the moderate Buffett turn, right? So your airspeed is probably roughly about 350 knots as we're making this happen. How close right now are we to an over G, right? And you should answer that we are not very close to an over G, all right? So you'd have to, basically go stick in the bucket at that point to go and make an over G happen. Stan, how quickly can you get to the moderate Buffett turn? And when you get to the moderate Buffett turn, how far back do you pull that stick, right? And I show him, and I make him show me here as well, right? This is where it starts. This is where it ends up. So Stan, I want you to go immediately from this position to this position and establish a good moderate Buffett turn. Now, we might not be perfect. It might not be exactly in the moderate Buffett turn. It might be a little bit past it, maybe in the stall. It might be a little bit too, easy on the backstick pressure. Might not be quite there, but this is an important step to take to go and control the amount of closure that we have on the Bandit, all right? So Stan, very rapidly with your right hand, pull back to that known stick position for the moderate Buffett turn, and what you will see is you will rapidly pull that Bandit down into past your assessment window, all right, and into your HUD, all right? And what I want you to do now is using aileron as you're making this happen, pull him down underneath the AIM-9 seeker circle, assess and make sure that we have the appropriate amount of aspect, right? And so again, he should have already seen these pictures on what is 30 degrees of aspect, what is 45 degrees of aspect, and he should know exactly now to either employ that weapon or to go for guns, right? So we'll say that at this point here, Stan, you see less than 45 degrees of aspect, right? I want you to uncage with your left hand, right? And press the pickle button with your right hand, right? You're going to take that Fox 2 as long as you see that air-to-air attack end greater than 0.4. If you see 0.6 or 0.5, I want you to take that shot. If you see 0.4, we'll talk about how to transition to the gunshot in a second. Does that all make sense? Perfect. All right, Stan, after you're doing this, right, you're going to see the AIM-9 seeker circle reappear, all right? At this point, I want you to go and reassess. Am I still in an AIM-9 WES? That goes down to the lower right-hand corner at your air-to-air attack end. If you still see a 0.6 or a 0.5, indicated at this point here, I want you to uncage, take a second Fox 2. Most likely, because we've probably got a significant amount of closure developing at this point, you're probably going to see 0.4 on your air attack end, right? We're going to blow off subsequent Fox 2s at this point, and now I would like you to go and attempt a gunshot. So how are we going to do that? As you see point 4, I would like you to go and increase the backstick pressure, to go and drag the bandit down underneath the 2,500 foot dot. Again, leading with the gun cross, right, to go and predict his plane of motion, right? He should be filling up the wingspan here with his he should be filling up the funnel now with his wingspan at the 2,500 foot dot. Stan, you've just solved for range, plane of motion, and lead fire. Now, and only now, I would like you to come down on the trigger for a good 2-second trigger squeeze, all right? And now, as we're taking that gunshot, I want you to assess the bandit's closure, right? So if you start to see the bandit getting larger inside of that funnel, I want you to immediately power modulate. And that means come out of AB all the way back to idle power, all right? And that's where I talk about making that happen, all right? Where are we going to see that closure? As we start to see the bandit's plane of motion, all right, planform start to increase, and now we're starting to see more detail on the jet, all right? And that's what we're going to be looking for to go and power modulate out there today, all right? Stan, at the end of that 2-second trigger squeeze, you're going to repo, all right? And now I talk about reasons why and how to repo. All right. So Stan, one reason to repo today is because you get a valid track, right? How many frames are available, or how many frames are required for a valid track? 15, right? So how long is that, all right? And I make him do the math, right? So it should be roughly, a quarter to a half of a second, right? Depending on how many frames we decide the tapes are actually making, right? So, but the bottom line is a track happens really freaking quickly, right? So 2 seconds is probably, hopefully, more than enough, right, for a valid track is what we're looking for, right? So at the end of that 2-second trigger squeeze, Stan, you should have a guns track. If not, you have fucked it away, and I would like you to, at this point, repo, all right? How are we going to repo, all right? So Stan, what I'd like you to do is you're already in idle power because we've already assessed closure at this point. I want you to immediately roll and set your lift vector, right, perpendicular to the horizon, right? So again, thinking about slapping that wing against the horizon. Stan, as long as you see line of sight away from the bandit, right, movement away from your canopy bow, I would like you to immediately roll back in, setting your lift vector halfway between the bandit and the horizon, and this is exactly the same as I briefed off of the perch. Stan, do you have any questions on that? Recommit will be standard at this point, all right? What are some other reasons to repo? I talk about 4 reasons to repo and 3 different kinds of repo, right? So the first reason to repo we already talked about, right? So I got a valid track or I fucked it away, right? That's going to be a reason to repo at this point, all right? How do I do it for the second time? If I see the bandit jink off the perch, that is another reason for me to repo, all right? And now the size of the repo depends on the size of the problem that I'm seeing at the bandit, right? From the bandit. What are some problems and what are some differentiation as far as the problems are concerned, right? If I see more planform and more closure out of the bandit, that's a bigger problem. It requires a bigger repo to get me back out to the control zone, all right? Range cues, similar but different, right? So now if I'm starting to see bubble cues, right? And what do I define as those? 1,500 feet will be the canopy separating from the rest of the jet. 1,250, right, would be the canopy bows or maybe the helmets inside of that. If I'm seeing either of those cues out there today, we're going to execute a quarter plane. Execute that in accordance with the quarter plane that we just briefed, right? Which should be the maximum, the most high performance, or sorry, max performance type of repo that we're going to talk about, right? So that would be standard as well, all right? So that's one reason. 2-second, a valid track. Second reason would be a jink, all right? Third reason, like I just talked about, right? How much closure, if I need a repo because the amount of closure is too significant, or I'm getting to the bubble, right? And I need to go and repo because of range, right? That would be the third reason out there to repo. The fourth reason to repo would be different. The fourth reason to repo is because as I go down, so to speak, for a gunshot, right, I notice that I enter the wing rock, right? My jet starts to shake from side to side. Stan, you can't gun a valid, or you can't get a valid track today in the wing rock, right? The T-38 is not capable of doing such a thing. You might get lucky and get a valid snap, right? But we want a valid track. That's what we're shooting for, right? So if you notice that, right, we're starting to get into the Mar Buffet and the jet is starting to wing rock at this point here, check your throttles and max AB and see if that fixes the problem, right? If it does, excellent, continue and repo for one of those other reasons that we talked about. If it does not fix the problem, right, and we're still in some sort of a wing rock, Stan, I'd like you to go and do an ease repo. And how are we going to do that, right? The mechanics on this one are going to be slightly different than the other repos that we talked about. First and foremost, we're not going to go to idle. We're going to leave the power up in max, right? We need that to go and increase our energy state. Now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to bring the bandit back to as a minimum, the assessment window, right? So you're going to ease off the backstick pressure in max AB, and what you're going to do is you're going to allow your airspeed at this point to increase, right? So you should be looking not just at the Bandit, but also at your HUD, seeing that your airspeed is increasing. This is also probably a good time to check and make sure that your speed brake is centered and up, right? Because that could be a problem, and again, where's that going to be indicated? Over on the left-hand side by your airspeed, all right? So something to check at this point. Now, you're going to leave him there for as long as it takes for you to go and get rid of those cues of the moderate buffet, right? So you should get out of the wing rock, all right? And now, pull him back down into the HUD, right? Reattempt a Fox 2 if you're at that appropriate range. If not, 0.4 or less on the air-to-air attack end. Continue with the gunshot. Now you should have solved that problem as far as being low on energy, right? Now start looking for another reason to repo, all right? And that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue doing this, right, until the flight lead, or sorry, your IP at this point calls terminate, right? Now, there are going to be times today where potentially, because we're so significantly nose low, we might have to start worrying about the floor. So I reference, on the left-hand side back here where I've got the BFM cross-check, right? So Stan, on a 3K, it's imperative for you to go and maintain awareness of the floor, right? Because, dude, if the Bandit dies because he impacts the floor and we die because we impact the floor, well, dude, that's a bad day, all right? We want to make sure that we prevent that from happening. He could die all he wants, right? But we're not going to let that happen. So you are not going to rely solely on the Bandit's floor transition to go and execute your own floor transition, right? So as we get closer to the floor, right, Betty saying altitude, altitude is not your cue to do a floor transition, right? That is just a reminder because you fucking forgot, right? So I want you to remember, right, that 12,000 feet, we don't want to be any lower than 20 degrees nose low, or else we're going to have to do a floor save. I would like you to have that awareness before we get to that altitude from Betty, right? So that's just a reminder. I want you to be the one that actually makes the decision to go and do that floor transition, right? And how are we going to do that floor transition? Ideally, what we should see out of the Bandit, right, is him do a floor transition out there in front of us, right? So he's going to go from below the horizon to slightly above the horizon, all right? As such, because we're flying in relationship to him, our nose is generally going to trend back in that same direction, right? So if it's not, then you've obviously got a problem here at this point. You probably don't have floor awareness, right? Because you're doing some sort of a low yo-yo for energy at this point. So as the Bandit transitions back above the horizon, let's follow him. Go back up, all right? And now bring that into your cross-check, right? So now as we're down at the floor, after a floor transition, I say normally I would like to be 500 feet above, right? So 10.5 on the clock is what we're looking for at this point, all right? As you get back and put him inside of the assessment window, all right, after a repo, now as you go in there and attempt another gunshot, right, you might be relegated at this point to Fox 2s only, all right, because you don't have the time at this point, potentially at 500 feet, to go and put him down underneath that 2,500 foot dot with your flight path marker slightly below the horizon. You're going to be descending while you're trying to make this shot, right? And if you clip your right wingtip at this point, you're going to die, and he's going to go off and drink at the O Club, right? And that's something that I don't want to have happen, all right? So maintain floor awareness, where is this especially true right after that floor transition. If you're relegated to Fox 2s, then just kill him with Fox 2s, right? And save the gunshots and the bullets for his wingman later on, all right? Cool. So that's a 3K, all right? What else you want me to talk about?
That's good. Anything else that you want to mention?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay.
So the probably the big thing here is I didn't really talk really a lot about the rudder pedals, and there shouldn't be a lot of discussion maybe at this level about the rudder pedals. I saved most of that primarily for the defensive BFM. But dude, if you find that you're maybe in the debrief or maybe during the flights, right, that as the as your student, right, is pulling the Bandit down into the HUD, as he transitions from his initial repo down to the moderate buffet turn, if you start to see something like this, and then we get a little bit off and he starts to ease off the backstick pressure, or maybe from the back seat, right, you're feeling the stick hit the inside of your thighs, right? You can look down at those rudder pedals, and what you should see, right, is them moving back and forth, right? And if they're not moving back and forth, right, my first question to him while we were flying was, Stan, where are your feet right now, right? Are they on the rudder pedals or are they on the floor, right? The answer should be on the rudder pedals, right? But I've heard several students say my feet are on the floor, right? Great. He's probably not going to be able to have enough strength to go and raise them up and put them on the rudder pedals, so it's probably a good idea at that point to just terminate, right? So, and now for the next 3K, you can say, Stan, I want you to fly with your rudders or feet on the rudder pedals, right? And you're going to have to reset your lift vector at this point using your rudder pedals. This is instruction that I hope that the student would have gotten on his AHC academics, right? So, and being able to work through that on the AHC profile, right? But if he's having a tough time with this, I would identify it hopefully during flight, and then we would talk about it again during the debrief, right? Some other clues, right, that he is having to fly without the rudder pedals, right, in the moderate buffet turn, is he is easing off the backstick pressure to go and reorient his lift vector, right? So he is trying to fly the L unsuccessfully, probably at a good moderate buffet turn. The jet is not responding, or it's responding in the opposite direction because of adverse yaw, right? So now what he's having to do is ease off the backstick pressure from maybe 0.9 AOA to 0.75 AOA. So if you're starting to see that, or the funnel breathing back and forth, right, that's probably a pretty good indication, right, that he's having to ease off, reorient his left vector, and then find the moderate buffet turn. What's happening then, right? He's not preserving closure. He's flying a straighter line, right? And he's also not flying the moderate buffet turn correctly, right? Which is, all kind of ramifications of that error, all right? And I would discuss that primarily in the debrief, right? And hopefully that he corrects that on his next sortie, all right? I think that's about all I wanted to talk about. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Grunt.
Cool. Does anybody have any questions or anything like that? I don't want to get into Spears as far as, hey, I brief things differently, because I'm sure everybody does, right? But that's kind of what I talk about, all right?
Thanks. Thanks. That's a good segue. So, a few things I wrote down, right? Different techniques. Grunt, the first one I noticed, right? Wing slap on the horizon for that initial repo. But he mentioned, right, he explained that this is not in accordance with the standards, right? So he told Stanley that, right, so the wingman's not confused, okay? So if you have a different, if you use a technique that's not in accordance with standards, that's fine. We all try different things. We all do different things, but just make sure you're telling Stanley, hey, this is not in accordance with the standards. So that Stanley can then go to the next IP and say, oh, this is the technique I've been briefed. Which brings me to that, like, what do you do when a wingman briefs a different technique? So I had a wingman brief that, like, so explain to me how you perform the repo. What power setting? Idle. Okay. How much are you? What's your lift vector? And he said, slap the horizon and get back into the turn. And I'm thinking, oh, that's not how Thug does it. I use 60 to 90. I bump up. So now I know Grunt is one of the guys that teaches that technique. Great. What did I do? I'm like, I didn't say, okay, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it this way. No, I said, all right, that's how you've been taught. Let's see how it works, right? I did explain to him, think about 60 to 90 bumping up, because that gives you some vertical turning room. But if you want to slap the wing on the horizon, that's your technique. We'll see how that works. But just think about how you are going to handle a different technique that Stanley briefs you when you ask him a question around OB3 or DB3, okay? Or OB2, DB2 if we can't keep the continuity there. So chair flying, right? I'm making the topic of the du jour. I'll have that, right? Chair flying. So what I want you to think about, okay, with this is, first of all, phase briefs, okay? I guess I'm not scheduled for phase briefs so much anymore as the DO, but you guys are. So what do you do for phase briefs, okay? There's a lot of admin stuff to talk about. That's great. They can read that on their own time, right? Talk to you in the bar, whatever. Do you give example briefs when you give a phase brief? Because that is maybe one of the first times that they hear this brief, and they can go back and chair fly it. So if you don't give a brief, OB-DB brief in that phase brief, I think that you should, right? Definitely do that. All right, so that's one thing about phase briefs. I don't know anyone that doesn't, but there's probably different things out there. I haven't sat in on anyone else's phase brief that they give. Something else is flight commanders, right? Maybe think about sending the wingman, right, to not just sandbag, but sit in on briefings and maybe even the debriefings. So again, they get that practice brief and they can go chair fly. Maybe you want to track it, maybe you don't. I'm not going to tell you to track it, but that's just something to think about, right? Again, to get these guys to see this and they can go back and chair fly appropriately. Okay? So they can sit in briefs. Obviously, phase brief as well. All right? And the other thing too here for, again, in general, what are we doing with this IP meetings in CT? All right, now you've heard what Grunt has briefed this time. We'll have Mean brief next time. Is now that you are scheduled for CT on Monday morning, those first 4 lines, go out and try this. Try the wing slap on the horizon technique and see how that works for you. Obviously, we've all developed our own techniques over the years, right? Left hand, right hand. what I noticed, what I thought about when I became an IP and IFF is like, how am I going to teach this to Stanley? It's just automatic at this point, right? It's in the cerebellum, the basal ganglia. I don't even think about it anymore. I do, but on a subconscious level. So now, how am I going to bring it back up to the cerebral cortex so I can teach Stan? So go try what Grunt briefed and see how it works for you, and then see how am I going to brief that to Stan, right? Do you have boundaries? So when you unload, what are you using? Are you using inches? Are you using knuckle whists, right? Finger whists? When you're unloading, right? Think of that. Like, how far am I going to go left or right? Okay. Think about those boundaries that you're going to give Stan to think about when he chair flies and he moves his left hand and right hand. Okay. And part of that is going out here and consciously flying it maybe a different way, and then really paying attention to what you're doing. And we had this discussion at the ops desk the other day, which is why Grunt brought it up about using rudders, right? They don't always use the rudders. In other jets, like, Strike Eagle, I don't think I use the rudder that much anymore. But this jet's all over the place. Okay, I had a couple months ago the one roller at code 3 because it would just, in a jink, it would be a uncontrolled, nosedive recovery after that point. But think about that also, right? Those rudder movements. How much? Full Buddha rudder, one heel width, 1 inch, whatever you use. But think about how you're going to communicate that to Stan to chair fly. Okay, so that's really the point here that I wanted to bring it all together. So practice these, and if you have different techniques, right, obviously bring it up to Grunt, like, hey, I didn't know that technique, or can you explain it to me, or I do it this way, I tried that, didn't work, how do you do it differently, right? Talk to him, and we can cross-pollinate, right, all those techniques, and of course, create more neuronal networks. All right, so there you go. That's the conclusion. Went a little bit long today. Suck it up. This is good for you, all right? And I want to be a better IP myself, and I want you guys to be a better IP. So the only thing I can do is change the name to the 435th KIP Academy. Denied, okay. F-38. Attitude, right? F-38. Those nerds fly T-38s. We fly F-38s. Yeah. All right, so it's Friday. It's already after 1700. I want to get out of here, but does anyone have any questions or comments right now? Thanks to Will in the back there for filming us. So we're going to post these. We're going to record and post all these IP meetings from now on as much as we can, so that the TRs and the guys that aren't here can actually get the good content that we are briefing to each other. All right, dudes. Thanks for sticking around on a Friday. See ya.